You are now listening to The Forefront Radio, where we discuss history, the Bible, the history of the Israelites, science, and other matters. Bring it out. The history of the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans as it relates to the Bible. Who were you prior to slavery? Who were you prior to colonization? These answers and more can be seen and heard as you listen to The Forefront Radio. Thank you for listening to The Forefront Radio. I'm your host, Afia Levi Israel. At this time, we're going to talk about the importance of knowing why there is an increase of cancer exposure and an explosion of cancer rates happening all across the globe. You see, you always get these propaganda pieces and media lies that tell you that maybe it's the food that causes cancer, or maybe it's environmental exposure, or maybe it's the sun, all these different variants of why cancer is caused. What scientists, doctors, lawyers, and political strategists and other figures that are responsible for giving information have failed to tell us is that the nuclear explosion and the rise in cancer rates have been occurring since Hiroshima and Nagasaki of the World War II era. Since the 1940s, the 1950s, and higher, we have been exposed to so much radiation. Find out more on the Forefront Radio. Nuclear radiation due to bombing has been neglected in vast reports through the media since the 1940s. The release of radiation is a phenomenon unique to nuclear explosions of several kinds. Okay, so you have several different types. You have gamma radiation, you have neutron, you have ionizing radiation, and these are emitted not only at the time of the detonation of the bomb itself, which is the initial radiation, but also for long periods of time afterward, which is the residual radiation. So now, according to atomicarchive.com, it says that initial nuclear radiation is defined as radiation that arrives during the first minute after an explosion and is mostly gamma radiation and neutron radiation. The level of initial nuclear radiation decreases rapidly with distance from the fireball to where less than one Roentgen may be received 5 miles from ground zero. In addition, initial radiation lasts a long only when nuclear fission occurs in the fireball. Initial nuclear radiation represents about 3% of the total energy in the nuclear explosion, so only 3%. Though people close to the ground zero may receive lethal doses of radiation, they are concurrently being killed by the blast wave and the thermal pulse. In typical nuclear weapons, only relatively small proportion of deaths and injuries result from the initial radiation. Now, here's the kicker. The residual radiation from a nuclear explosion is mostly from the radioactive fallout. This radiation comes from the weapon's debris, the fission products, and, in case of the ground burst, radiated soil. There are over 300 different fission products that may result from fission reaction. Many of these are radioactive with widely differing half-lives. Some are very short, for example, fractions of a second, while a few are long enough that the materials can be hazarded for months or years. The key thing that we want to look at is years. Now, radiation effects on humans. Certain body parts are specifically affected by the exposure to radioactive sources. Several factors are involved in determining The potential health effects of exposure to radiation. This includes the size of a dose, the ability of the radiation to harm human tissue, and which organs are affected. So think about it like this. So many people suffer from hair, brain, thyroid, blood system, heart, gastrointestinal, reproductive, and other debilitating cancers that people have failed to realize that the Americas, the European powers, and all these foreign nations have had nuclear testing for decades. Decades. So now, in the Bible, it talks about how God will destroy those that destroy the earth. Many people are suffering from cancers, including relatives of mine. And I found this to be important to note that it's not some unknown cause, it's not some strange pathology. There's a direct correlation with the amount of governments releasing nuclear explosions all across the earth. One example would be in 2010 or 2011, Fukushima plant was destroyed and devastated due to the fact that there was a catastrophic earthquake. When that earthquake happened in the ocean off the coast of Japan, the resulting fallout of that situation ended up creating a tsunami. Now, that tsunami ended up infiltrating a nuclear power plant, and nuclear radiation was exposed to the world. A year later, you find that there were many stories of animals dying all across the planet. And miraculously, people could not figure out why. While the news media was hiding these things under the table, just brushing it off as maybe related to algae blooms of red tide, they failed to mention the fact that the world has been exposed to nuclear radiation for decades, for years now. It is important to note that when we talk about nuclear radiation exposure, we can't just isolate it to food or genetically modified organisms. We have to look at actual direct sources that affect the human body. And since 1950, the amount of bombs that have been exploded go well over 2,500. Yes, you heard it, folks. Since the 1950s up until now, there has been more, I'm sorry, since the 1940s with the nuclear explosion in World War II, there has been more nuclear weapons that have been tested than one can count on their hands. They have poisoned the planet. If you wonder why there's increases of breast cancer, for those that celebrate October with Breast Cancer Awareness Month, if you want to know why there's so much leukemia and bloodborne diseases, it is all caused by the direct violation of human life and sanctity caused by governments and their willy-nilly exposure to setting off bombs just because they want to. Since you already know how the bomb works, why would you still use them, knowing that this will poison the planet? Guess what? These idiots don't care. These idiots don't care if they're killing a population. They don't care if cancer is caused directly by their involvement. God says in the book of Revelation that he shall destroy those that destroy the earth. It's very important for us to know this. That way we can get our lives right, closer to the Creator, repent from our sins, and start following the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Bible with faith in the Black Messiah. We will return in just a moment after we listen to this wonderful song.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Give ear, my people, incline your ears to my words. I will open my mouth in a parable, I will utter dark sayings of old, which ye have not heard, nor have known. We will not hide it from our children, showing the truth to each generation, to praise the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works. For He established a testimony and a law appointed for Israel, which He hath commanded our fathers, to make them known to the children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. That they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. That they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. That they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of old, the things He's done before. I wanna be the one, the righteous one in the kingdom. The righteous one, the righteous one. I wanna be the righteous one in the kingdom, in the kingdom. That they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. That they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of old, the things He's done before.
We are back again at the Forefront Radio discussing the cause of cancer explosion throughout the world. This episode has been provided by the Forefront Radio in the hopes to further educate the population of the diaspora as to information that is not readily given to us. We must refrain from trying to excel in entertainment, in comedic events, and things that are not worth substantial information. And this podcast can be supported through listeners like you. Now, on atomicarchive.com, the Manhattan Project, the making of the atomic bomb, is briefly discussed as a short history of the origins and development of the American atomic bomb program during World War II. Beginning with the scientific developments of the pre war years, the monograph details the role that the United States government had in conducting a secret nationwide enterprise that took science from the laboratory into combat. with an entirely new weapon. The monograph concludes with a discussion of the immediate post war period, the debate over the Atomic Energy Act of 1946, and the founding of the Atomic Energy Commission. When you look at the Manhattan Project on a particular chart that is listed, it gives the different tiers associated from the top policy group, which is the president, the military policy committee, which includes the secret war and the interim conference committee, the chief of staff associated with then General H. Arnold, Major General L.R. Groves, as well as Nichols' administrative matters and Groves' other matters, the planning of military operations from Brigadier General T.F. Farrell, Deputy, and the Manhattan District of Colonel K.D. Nichols. Other establishments were set up. Clinton Engineer Works were set up. Hanford Engineer Works were set up, and Los Alamos. The references can be found on atomicarchive.org/history Manhattan Project, and you can select to see the bibliography, which gives the chronology of the Manhattan Project. In 1919, Ernest Rutherford discovers the proton by artificially transmuting an element of nitrogen into oxygen. In 1930, Ernest O. Lawrence builds the first cyclotron in Berkeley. Robert J. DeGraaf develops the electrostatic generator. In 1932, James Chadwick discovers the neutron. In 1932, also, J.D. Cockcroft and E.T.S. Walton first split the atom. So these names are important to note because these are the beginning stages of what leads to World War II and eventually later on to the proliferation of nuclear weapons throughout the planet through all these leading nations, first world countries and second world countries included. In jumping down in in 1934, Enrico Fermi produces fission. December 1938, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discover the process of fission in uranium. So, as you look through the chronology of this information provided by atomicarchive.org, it's showing that it's well documented how the progression goes from the beginning stages to the early stages of World War II. For example, in May 3rd of 1941, Seaborg proves plutonium is more fissionable than uranium-235. In May 17th of 1941, a National Academy of Sciences reports emphasis the necessity of further research. Then in June 22 of 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. This begins to be the start of World War II. In 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Also in 1941, the S1 Committee, Executive Committee, which replaced the Uranium Committee in the Office of Science and Research Development, gives Lawrence $400,000 to continue electromagnetic research. Think about that. $400,000 is equivalent to millions back in 1940 time, okay? Bush gives Roosevelt an optimistic report on the possibility of producing a bomb. This was in March 9th of 1942. And then we see further on the various developments of what happened. In September 17th of 1992, Colonel Leslie R. Groves is appointed head of the Manhattan Engineer District. He is promoted to Brigadier General 6 days later. Fast forward to 1933, Groves decides to double the size of Y2. Construction also begins in 1943 of the K-25 at Oak Ridge. In 1943, late December, specifically December 15th, the first Alpha racetrack is shut down due to maintenance problems. So we see here that the proliferation of uranium 232 in Los Alamos, the beta building at Y12 is also completed, going leading up to 1944. So all these things are the beginning stages of World War II and leading into the fall of that nuclear explosion in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. With that being said, folks, the United States in itself has dropped so many nuclear weapons that it defies logic. So, according to the Guardian, during the so-called war on Iraq, right? They were searching for weapons of mass destruction, but we find that these so-called weapons of mass destruction did not come from the Iraqi people. According to theguardian.com, Iraq littered with high levels of nuclear and dioxin contamination based on a study. Greater rates of cancer and birth defects near sites, depleted uranium among poisons revealed in report. More than 40 sites across Iraq are contaminated with high levels or radiation and diotoxins, with 3 decades of war and neglect having left environmental ruin in large parts of the country, an official Iraqi study has found. The environment was set up like this by the United States government and their allies that sent nuclear radiation into this nation. Areas in and near Iraq's largest cities and towns included Najaf, Basra, and Fallujah account for around 25% of the contaminated sites, which appear to coincide with communities that have seen increased rates of cancer and birth defects over the past 5 years. The joint study by the Environment, Health, and Science Ministries found that scrap metal yards in and around Baghdad and Basra contained high levels of ionizing radiation, which is thought to be a legacy of depleted uranium used in munitions during the first Gulf War and since the 2003 invasion. So think about this, folks. We have a world government system in the United States that has poisoned an entire population on the earth. This is why the nations fear this place. They feel like they can't cross America because the United States has proliferated nuclear radiation, became a watchdog unto others, accused them of crimes against humanity, but in turn actually committed these acts. Is it a wonder why those of the diaspora, Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, have been warning the world for years that this system has been established, created, and still till this day has been built on the oppression of mankind? This is the kingdom referred to the Bible as Babylon the Great, the mystery of iniquity, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. What other country in the world could create such a weapon that is now called Satan? The other nations now that have co-joined the United States of America include China, they include the country of Russia, who has a bomb right now called Satan 2. You have to be a child of a demonic entity to name a weapon that can cause so much damage to the population, the name of Satan. That means this thing is no joke, folks. And while many are distracted with these illusions of Romanistic games, such as the football of the NFL, the MLB, as well as the NBA, these clown circuses of Roman architecture and these stadiums of gladiatorial events have deceived the masses, as well as your social media, which cycles perpetual information that is readily irrelevant to the psyche of the mind. But people love the propaganda. That is why it is imperative for those that listen to the Forefront Radio to be awake to the ways of the world, like Nas says. Be awake to the ways of the world. Know what's going on around you, because World War III is imminent and World War III may come at any time. We don't know if it's next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but it surely does come quickly with the situation evolving now with the Ukraine, Russia, as well as the allies of the United States, as well as the United States itself. If we look at Basra, there are some heavily polluted areas. There are many factors contributing to it. First, it was the battlefield of two wars: the Gulf War, the Iran Iraq War, where many kinds of bombs were used. Also, oil pipelines were bombed. Most of the contamination settled in and around Basra. So it's important to see these things, folks. We need to be awake to the ways of the world, know what's going on, and protect our family and loved ones. Now, mind you, it's there's no nuclear bunker that you could go to hide yourself. It's in the food, it's in the water, it's in the air. We've been completely exposed to these things. Okay. All you can do is do your best to grow your food, eat healthy, pray and fast that the Most High can cleanse the earth. The Bible does say that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and that we are going to prepare ourselves for a new heaven and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness, because this world has been corrupted from the inhabitants thereof. Thank you so much for listening to the Forefront Radio. Share this information and contact with all your friends and family. We appreciate all your support. And once again, we ask you to always investigate, because the truth does not fear investigation. Shalom. Thank you for listening to the Forefront Radio. We now have a Cash App. The link is in the description of the page here on anchor.fm, also on Spotify. We appreciate you listening in. We do have a few features that we are including now. We are selling a few products such as watches, perfumes, colognes, and other products will be available for our Israelite community, as well as the general community of the population. We have a Facebook page. Just type in The Forefront Media, and you'll be able to get updates of various shows that we drop when they do drop. Please do share this show if you like the show, and we do hope that you do love this show. And tune in for more episodes once we have them available. Thank you for listening to The Forefront. I'm your host, Afiel Levi Israel.